Ever since I was a toddler, I was very interested in history, as it was one of my favorite subjects to explore in my free time. Back when I was only 4 or 5 years old, I would log on to 2007 YouTube and watch all the documentaries I could about World War II specifically. I loved watching old footage, and I was amazed that all of these things happened long before I was born, and that there are recordings of it. I loved how complex and crazy military machines and ideas were, and I really romanticized war as a kid, and I wish I could design my own military planes, battleships, and tanks. My love for history started as most things started for kids, by asking questions, of course. I even remember the day it happened. It was a hot summer day, and my mom was working and my dad and I were driving to pick up my little sister from preschool. There used to be a small breakfast restaurant our family would go to nearby called Ted and Marie's that was run by a husband and wife duo, Ted and Marie. And by the time we were going there, Ted had died years ago and Marie was really old. And I remember Marie telling my dad and I the story of her and her husband, and mentioned that his grave was actually across the street from my sister's daycare. So I insisted that we should go visit the grave. So that day when we went to pick up my sister, we decided to leave early so we could see Ted's grave. The reason why I wanted to see his grave is something that I can't remember, as this took place over 10 years ago. I don't know though, I still have a fascination with cemeteries, as I do go to one every once in a while. I guess it would have to do with my fascination with what was happening before I was born, but I had never expressed that to my dad yet, but he was still willing to take me to whatever place piqued my interest. When we got to the grave, I tried to imagine what Ted was like before he died, just by the etching of his face on the grave. And I actually don't remember if there was an etching of him on the grave or not, but I sure do remember seeing him, whether that was a picture shown to me or what I had imagined him to look like all those years ago. All of a sudden, a loud noise came from behind the cemetery, and I saw a weird-looking tan truck being parked alongside a bunch of other strange-looking vehicles. So I asked my dad what those trucks were being used for, and he explained to me that there was a small military base behind the cemetery. And then I asked him what military was, and from there he began to explain the concept of war and the wars that the United States has fought in. I then proceeded to ask my dad so many questions over the next few years as I learned about the world of wars, the weapons, the tools, the icons throughout the history of all the wars, and it was just all super fascinating to me, and how much had happened before I was born, and that there are still people alive that have experienced those events. So from then on, battleships, tanks, and war stories is what I love to consume. I was amazed at German technology in World War II, American fighter planes, and Japanese battleships, as it expanded my imagination and the possibilities of all the storylines that I lived in within my head. Now you might be wondering why I'm telling this story, because it doesn't really relate to my art in any way directly, but looking back on my interests as a kid, I'm very thankful that I fell in love with history rather than being obsessed with SpongeBob or whatever the average kid was infatuated with at the time. And being someone who's so disconnected with reality and not a very logical thinker, I think it was crucial that I had something like history as an interest, as I became more in touch with the world and how it worked. It was also something I could pride myself on, as I used to feel like I was smarter than the average kid because I knew history. Obviously that's not how it works, but the thought that I had something over many of the kids I was surrounded by pushed me to continue to learn more about history, and I think I became more cultured because of it. My early interest in history paid off, as now when I look around me today at the artists around my age who are all trying to make it independently, I see the disadvantage of not being able to see outside your own perspective, because they never had the interest to learn about the real world. Their only interests are the infatuations they have within their own world, which is perfectly fine, as an artist can create their best work from being able to reach as far back into their head as they can and then express it onto their chosen medium. The issue for artists and my generation of people reaching adulthood is that they don't have experience with the real world, and they don't understand how large populations operate and the importance of history. Many artists that are millennials or Generation Z have been raised in a world that's so focused around individuality, and within the individualistic culture that we live in, there are illusions of individualism. Many things are being sold as something to make one more unique, when in all reality there is still child labor producing mass amounts of that product for that person categorized within that given interest group. There are still many examples of this, even within the aesthetics people cling onto as a way for self-expression, being sold as something more unique and quirky than it actually is. Our generation is infatuated with ourselves and our perception of the world, but we don't spend much time within the heads of the people that shaped the century before us, let alone the millennium before us. We don't spend much time in anyone's head for that matter, as much as we imagine ourselves in their shoes, as we become more and more busy upkeeping our identity and who we think we are, and what we mean to the masses of unknown people, rather than thinking beyond how you want to be perceived. By learning about the real world and trying to understand the perspective of the many people who have been deemed as either good or bad throughout history, you can then start to piece together the complex machine of what society is. You can start to understand the motives for not only the victors in history, but the people that have been put on the losing side of history, as there's always a side to the story that is largely forgotten and not understood. History gives one, especially an abstract-minded artist like myself, a broader worldview, as they could understand the hypocrisies and cycles that we continue to fall into. One could then start to notice the patterns within the stories and the people and begin to get a better understanding of what human nature is and the importance of what all this information tells us about not only our past but our future. The thing that is important to remember, though, is how one perceives history, as two people could read the same historical text about something and come to completely different conclusions on how they feel about it. History is not like art, as subjective meanings aren't taken well unless it's derived from a mythological text or anything of the sort. And even then, there is still very real information within the text that breaks down human nature in a way that's very unknown to most of us today. History is taking a step back from good and evil and observing both sides and understanding the cause and effect. And from there, an artist with a new worldview can then create art with a broader perspective. Because as perceptive as the world is, there's still a lot to learn under the collective thoughts that we all share. And the more one is connected with that, the better that they understand not only the diversity of their audience and how to cater to that, but they will start to understand the nature of the rest of society, and they could then start to make better decisions based not only on instincts, but through the analysis of the market and who they're trying to cater to. Anyways, thank you for watching, and if you're interested in seeing more of what I create, feel free to check out my YouTube channel or my Instagram and TikTok in the description below. And if you feel like supporting my work or my brand, feel free to check out the website that is also in the description, where I sell apparel, prints, and original work. Thank you.